Hey guys, it's Darren. Welcome to the latest episode of my quaint little show where we talk about everything from watches to bicycles to just kind of life in Manhattan. But today we are going to focus back on kind of the thing that got me going on this whole channel in the first place is watches. And the image you see on your screen is going to be sort of one quarter of what we're going to talk about today. And we're not going to be talking about the Newmans, although we're going to talk about a Newman homage. And much to my chagrin, we're not going to be talking about the Newman in the upper right, which is, of course, the Paul Newman Daytona, one of the most iconic, most amazing, most collectible watches, not only in the world of Rolex, but really of all of horology. And you could even make the argument in some cases this is not an horological piece. Make the argument in some cases this is not an horological piece. It's a piece that just has incredible collectability. Over time, it's something that has developed from a watch that, interestingly, Rolex has really had a tough time selling. Now, I'm going to go back 50 years, 40 years actually, in the 60s and 70s when that was a problem, but it's turned into literally one of the more iconic watches. I'm going to show you a picture in a few minutes of one of the most expensive wristwatches ever to sell at auction. It was like $1.4 million, I believe, for a Rolex. But we're going to focus today. I'm going to give you a quick little history on the Rolex because I think it's interesting. You could spend a week. There could be entire novels written about the history of the Daytona and iterations of it and sort of how it's grown into the status that it has today. But just a couple of minutes on the background I think is kind of neat because, frankly, in the early 60s when the watch was developed, it wasn't all that awesome. It was sort of it was a different piece. It was a departure for Rolex. It was something that was developed for the racers and the people who, had interest in keeping time when they were on a racetrack, frankly. And it was not the greatest piece in the world. It was an acrylic crystal. It was a 38 millimeter case, which was pretty big back then, actually. But it was nothing fancy. The movement wasn't particularly awesome. It was a chronograph, but was not a chronometer certified chronograph for the first many years, actually, probably about 35 years of its existence. But the main thing is, it was something that was different. And in the Rolex world, that's not always a great thing. So it had a real challenge selling. Paul Newman ended up, as lore goes, it was something that his wife Joanne Woodward had given him as a gift, I believe in 1972, and he fell in love with the darn thing and wore it. Again, this is folklore, may or may not be true, but until he died in 2008, supposedly every single day of his life, Paul Newman wore his Daytona. So, which is, of course, is where the Paul Newman moniker comes, because it was something that not only did he, really put it on the map. You're going to see here there's actually an ad that Rolex had to try to drive sales of this darn thing that they really struggled selling in a lot of ways. It was a lot of dealers were discounting them heavily. They basically couldn't give them away. So as time moved on, the watch got better. I mentioned there was, in the 80s, and again, I'm going to apologize for the lack of detail on this, but it's a model 6263. They called it their albino. Supposedly there's only 4 pieces of this in existence, but it sold 3 or 4 years ago for almost $1.4 million was the price this piece sold for at auction. So one of the most expensive watches of all time ever to sell. And it's just grown. The picture I'm showing you right now is really where the watch is evolved to today. It's a ceramic bezel. It's a chronograph, of course, chronometer certified movement, one of the best movements that Rolex puts in their watches today. So it's gone from something that was sort of an afterthought and a B market for Rolex into one of their premier pieces. And that is, I think, what inspired so many copies of it and so many knockoffs of it and so many homages of it. And where you are today is where we're going to discuss for the rest of the time, and that's going to be what Steinhart has come up with, which is what you see right here. And this is on my wrist. This is my watch. I got it a couple of days ago. I do buy my Steinharts from Newman watches. That is not to say there's anything bad about ordering from Steinhart directly. I've just never done it. My experiences with Newman watches, I'll leave a link, by the way, below to their site if you're interested in working with them. Quick little background on them is they're based in Singapore, but they ship very quickly. I've gotten a bunch of watches from them. It takes 3 days to get from Singapore to New York City. So nothing but positives to say, and nothing but positives to say about their service experience and the way they work with you. So that's my little plug for Newman watches. But so I saw this and felt a little bit guilty about getting it, but then I realized, you know what, this is something that is a bit different. And it's not tiny. The shot you're looking at right now is on my wrist. I'll show you a couple of different angles here. It is a thick piece, and frankly, the feedback that I've received, more questions, I suppose, than feedback, because not too many people have these yet, is the concern over the height of the watch. It's 18 millimeters thick. My goodness, I was terrified when I got my Rolex DeepSea at 17.7 millimeters, and I go and plunk some money down on this thing, which, by the way, on that NATO band, makes it even thicker. So that adds a few more millimeters because of the two layers of the NATO underneath you can see there. But interestingly, it's not overwhelmingly bulky to wear. And that surprised me. I guess maybe partly I'm making the transition here from my Rolex, which I wore more than anything else every day, to this. But you're going to see in a couple of minutes, I'm going to do some comparisons here for you with not only the Rolex side by side, but also a Seiko SKX 009. So that's a watch we're all familiar with. It's a size that's comfortable for most people. You got to decide whether or not it's for you or not. But that's where we're going to start, is the thickness, because it is so not as thick as you would think it is when you put it on. So taking these pictures took me forever to get these things right. So you'll see I'll kind of transition through a few views here. So on the left side is the Rolex, in the middle is the Steinhart, and on the right is my my SKX, which I've put a different bezel on there and put a different bezel insert. You'll see it's got the blue and the black bezel insert. And don't make fun of me. I know it's a GMT insert on a non-GMT watch. I just love the way it looks, and that's one of the fun things about the SKX. But you can see, as you look at the three images, the Rolex is thick. It's really thick. And on the first image, where all three bands, the Rolex has a bracelet, and the Steinhart and the SKX have the NATO bracelets, they're not that much taller. And you got to remember, the Rolex is sitting directly on, the case back is on that little glass that I used, and the other two are sitting on top of the same piece of glass, but they're sitting there with the NATO strap underneath it to bulk it up. So the next image you see, I took the straps off, and there you go. You've got the case back sitting directly on there. So as you start to compare the height of these things, and if you're going to wear these all on bracelets, and I am typically not a bracelet guy, I'm a NATO guy, leather strap guy, you can sort of get a sense that it's not that much taller. Even when we move all the way, and the next image here, I'm comparing just the Rolex and the Steinhart, because they are both such thick watches. And when you see the Steinhart, a lot of that thickness comes from the acrylic, not from the acrylic. Oh, I take that back, from the crystal. It is a sapphire crystal, by the way, so you don't have to run into the scratching images that the Rolex ran into, because that had an acrylic crystal back in the day. And it did have a big domed crystal like that back in the day, by the way, so I have to imagine they got scratched up pretty easily. So the next shot is on my wrist, and you can see on the left-hand side is the Steinhart, on the right is the Rolex, and you can see the difference in the height. It's of course, my arm gets higher as it goes up, so you can see it's a tiny bit thicker on the left, as you'd expect, but a lot of that comes from the NATO band, so not unwearable at all. I'll just cycle through a couple of images here so you can take a look and see how they compare. Again, you can see the Steinhart is on the left and the Rolex is on the right. It's comfortable. I typically like a heavy watch. I'm not really a titanium guy. I kind of like the weight of a watch, and frankly, the Rolex is probably one of the heaviest watches I've acceptable quote unquote watches I've ever seen. So this is nice. It does have some weight to it. And if you do leave Steinhart's bracelet, which, by the way, I have nothing but good things to say about Steinhart's bracelets, whether you get them on some of their less expensive watches or on this watch, which, by the way, I think is $1,060 retail on Newman Watches site, and that does include shipping, by the way. You're getting a nice bracelet for the money. Is it a Rolex, glide lock? No, but again, we're comparing Ferraris with BMWs here. So as we move through, you can see the difference in the height and the depth, how they wear rather similar. The case size by Steinhart says it's a 42 millimeter. Where's about that, I'd say. And let's go over now to transition over to the SKX, because really that's where you'd expect to see the big difference. You're talking an 18 millimeter thick watch versus a far, far, far less tall watch in the SKX that I think just about anybody can wear. And again, we'll just kind of go through the pictures here, and you can take a look and you tell me what you think of them. I really want some feedback, guys, on what you see in the pictures, but I'm sure this is going to generate questions. In the Urban Gentry Facebook page, I posted this on Friday, and I've gotten a zillion responses. One of the things I was really happy about, on a side note, as we kind of cycled through more of these images, is there were a couple people about a week and a half ago who had posted on TGV's Urban Gentry group on Facebook, which is a private group, by the way. All you have to do is sign up, and love to get you approved. Not me. I don't have anything to do with the site. I just think it's an amazing site with amazing participation, and of course TGV, who runs the whole thing, is one of the great guys in this whole world of social media, especially with watches. But a lot of negatives came across from people, sort of dissing what it is and the copy that it is, and who's not gonna agree with that. It's practically a copy of the original. But after I did mine, there was an awful lot of positives. If you look at the likes versus the upside downs, I've got close to 200 likes and only half a dozen people who put anything down on it, and even the comments were overwhelmingly positive. So I'm enthused to see that, because I think this is one of those pieces that's not trying to copy an iconic watch that is way out of the price range of the vast majority of us, me included. And they've just given everybody not everybody, because $1,000 is not cheap for a watch, but they've given the enthusiast hope that they can wear something that's truly cool and truly iconic. So take a look there if you want to see more feedback. One thing I did here on these last few images was I took and placed the two watches on top of my computer monitor and just put a little scale on top of it, so you can take a look and see there's not overall differences between the Rolex and the Steinhart when you put them there. It's very clear. Now this image, you can see how sort of that round crystal on the Steinhart, definitely it's tall, and here's the crystal on the Rolex right next to it. It's a big bulbous curved crystal. This last image here gives you an idea of the Steinhart on the left and the SKX on the right. There's a little bit more of a downhill going there, but I think you'd probably expect that. But again, you're comparing apples and apples here, in a sense that both watches, there's no you can see there's no straps, no bracelets on them. So you're really comparing just the overall, the thickness of the watch. And this last image is, just the three of them. I just put them on a table and just took a shot of what they look like if you're looking at them, top down. So I would say this overall: if you're thinking about getting it, look, I've got a bunch of Steinhart watches. I almost consider in some cases Steinhart, for most of us, a very collectible type of manufacturer, because they've got a lot of variety. They make a lot of different types of watches, and clearly they are taking some of the iconic designs, whether it's from Panerai or Bell & Ross, and a lot of Flieger watches they do, certainly Rolexes, and this is their latest one in that world. And they are just making watches they're copies, for all intents and purposes, of way more expensive timepieces, but they're something that you can feel good about. You're not trying to impress anybody because, again, as we all know, very, very few people ever notice what you have on your wrist, unless you're part of our group, of course. But at the end of the day, I think it's a beautiful, automatic, well done, very comfortable, very fun watch that you can enjoy. It's something to have fun with. It's something that you certainly are adding a dimension to your collection with. And honestly, I give it 2 thumbs up. I don't see anything other than to say, if you want it, get it. I would love to hear the opposing views, and I know I'm going to hear some in the comments, and I always welcome those. But the real thing here, guys, is ask me questions. If you're not sure, let me answer your questions for you. I'll do whatever I have to get the answers. I can tell you this. I don't know what Steinhart supply is. I know that Newman watches, the gentleman who I work with in their customer service, his name is Anders. He told me how many they get, and they get quite a lot, and they still sold out very, very quickly. So I'd say if you want it, order it fast. Otherwise, you're going to have to get on a wait list, and I'm sure they're going to make more. But, overall, go with it. It's a fantastic piece. I want to hear your feedback. I want to hear your comments. Little different format today. If you can tell, you guys didn't have to look at my ugly mug today. I just tried to figure, let's make it more on content than me flailing around in my apartment here in Manhattan. So keep the feedback coming, guys. As always, thank you for spending some time with me and listening to my opinions. And I hope there's something that helps you make a decision on your next watch. Until we talk again, guys, thanks for the time. And as I always say, be amazing.